on this very cold, wintry day, Chicago. The history behind this shiur really goes back to the days of when I was involved in the yeshiva by David Soloveitchik Zatzal Ma'ariv Rabbi, and we were learning this parak mizbach מקדש in the Beis Medrash in the afternoon, and I came to realize that this parak is, even for Bachrim who are involved in Kodshim a whole day, is a very difficult parak. The concepts in it are a little bit foreign, and what happened was that they asked me to say a shiur that was hakdama, that prefaced the whole parak, to give them some of the primary concepts of the parak, so that they could understand, going through the parak, what the general concepts were, and therefore they would be able to understand in further in full depth the sugyas that they were learning. Based on that, I felt that it was appropriate and necessary, maybe, for the people that are learning Daf Yomi, for the same reason, to prepare maybe a scaled back version of that Chabura, not all the lumdis, but a chelik of the lumdis, and the general concept of this parak. We can start out by saying that I would say part one of Maseches Zvachim is the fact that we have Parak Ezel Mekayman, Parak Kodshei Kodshim, which discusses how we make a carbon kosher. Then, if we go back to the beginning of the Masechta, we have part two of the Masechta that discusses, from the first four prakim, discusses how you passel a carbon, whether inadvertently or advertently, but how you passel a carbon. We're now up to part three of the Masechta. Part three of the Masechta is after you have passeled the carbon, and one would think that the story is all over, that this carbon has no more hakrava to it. After all, the carbon is passel. The Mishnah and the Gemara is now introducing us to a yesod that no, the carbon still has hakrava. There is still hakrava, which under certain circumstances, not in all circumstances, but in certain circumstances, as we're going to find out, could have a din hakrava on it. The parak starts out, HaMizbeach Mekadesh, and we're going to discuss this concept of the Kiddush Mizbeach, that the Mizbeach itself gives Kedusha to the article of the carbon that came up on it. And Rashi explains that Rashi here, in this one line, in the beginning of the parak, is really giving us a synopsis of the whole parak. Says Rashi, what is the yesod of this parak? The yesod of this parak is afilu davar pasel, even something that's pasel. Sha'ol mizbeach, if it got to the top of the mizbeach, kidshay ha mizbeach, there is kedushas mizbeach, le'osais lachmai. Kuda number one, to become lachmai, that's what we're going to be discussing. What is this mean, lachmai? Lachmai shom mizbeach. Ve'emai reading I and that you don't take it off the mizbeach. In order to fully understand the depth of this Rashi and all the different parts of this Rashi, so I'd like to speak out two Rashis al Torah. In two psukim in al Torah, Rashi comments that it's teaching us the side of Hakravas Psulim, that Psulim have Hakrava. The first pasuk is Parshas Tetzaveh, and the Parsha of the Miluim. The pasuk tells us, Shivas Yomim Techarper al Mizbeach V'Kidashta Oisai. You should be Mekadesh the Mizbeach. V'Hoya HaMizbeach Kodesh Kadoshim. The Mizbeach is Kodesh Kadoshim. Kohanegea BaMizbeach Yiktosh. Whatever will touch the Mizbeach has Kedusha. Comments Rashi, V'Hoya Mizbeach Kodesh Umahi Kedushasai. And what is the Kedusha of this Mizbeach? Kohanegea BaMizbeach Yiktosh. Says Rashi, afilu carbon pasel, even a carbon pasel, she'ala, which the halacha is that it has no more akrava, over she'ala, if it goes to the top of the mizbeach, kidshay ha-mizbeach lehachshiroi, to be machshirit, we'll have to explain what that means, shelo yerid, that you should not take it down. And then Rashi explains, like the Mishnah is going to tell us, that not everything can have this Kiddush Mizbeach. It depends on what type of psul it is, and that's going to be a separate discussion. But Al Kapanim Rashi explains this concept in the pasuk of Kol Negeh b'Mizbech Yikdash that the Kedushas of Mizbech is there today to create a situation that the carbon puzzle that went to the rosh Mizbech, the Mizbech was machsherin, that you should not remove it from the Mizbech. That's Rashi number 1 in Tzav. In Parshas Tzav, on the pasuk of Tzaves Araves Bonav Lemar, Zois Teras Ha'oila, He Ha'oila al Moikta, on the Moikid, on the Marocha, ala Mizbeach, Kol Halayla Adaboiker. Ve'esha Mizbeach Tukaboy. Says Rashi, what is this Zois Teras Ha'oila? So we're going to skip the first Shan Rashi. Ulalami, says Rashi, Ala Psulim, Absulim, Ezay im Allah Yered, Ve'ezay im Allah la Yered. Oh, also that it's teaching us this concept that psulim that go on the rosh Mizbeach, that they should not be removed. Shekol teres l'rabaisu ba'loymar Torah achas l'chol oilen. There is one halacha for all psulim, ve'afilu psulim shem ol yerdu. Even psulim could have akrava. So we now find 2 Rashis and 2 psukim. Kol negeh b'mizbeach yiktosh, that teaches us this concept that psulim have a din akrava when they get to the rosh Mizbeach, and we have the pasuk of Hiya Oila Al Moikta, that the pasuk tells us that once it goes up Al Moikta, then there's a din akrava even on psulim. Torah achas l'chol ha'oilen afilu psulim. So my Rebbe David Soloveitchik Zatzal said over from his father the Briskerov a very important yesod, and he says that there's really 2 parshias that happened and 2 separate dinim, as Kiyadu and Brisk. It's 2 dinim, so it's 2 dinim. There's the din of the pasuk from that we learn out from Parshas Tetzaveh of Ahoya Mizbech Kodesh Kadoshim Kol Negeh b'Mizbech Yikdash, and there's the din of Hi Oil Al Moikta, and they divide themselves. The pasuk of Kol Negeh b'Mizbech Yikdash is mechadish to us that the Mizbech has a kedusha to transfer kedusha on the davar apostle. And the te'elis of that over Kodesh is that it should be on the rosh Mizbeach. But that in itself doesn't teach us the concept that it has akrava. It just says, Kol Negeh b'Mizbeach Yikdash. Once it went on the rosh Mizbeach, and the Mizbeach can give it kedusha. But it doesn't have within itself the musig, the concept that the davar apostle has akrava. That concept that the davar apostle has akrava it comes from the pasuk in Parshas Sav. The pasuk in Parshas Sav says, "Hi ha'oila al moikta," that the davar hakarev, the avarim of the oila, even if they're apostle, if they started their hakrava on the marach of the mizbeach, they should continue their hakrava. So this is the first time we find the concept that even a davar apostle, who because of its psul we're saying shouldn't have hakrava anymore. No, the pasuk tells us that there are certain circumstances. In other words, if you had already din 1 of Kol Negeh b'Mizbech Yikdash, and the Mizbech was Mekadesh, now you could have din number 2 that you could go ahead and do the hakrava of hakravas psulim. Just as a little bit of a background, this inyan of hakravas psulim, is not only relevant to the fact that a davar hakarv al gab mizbeach has hakrava vayter, has a continuous hakrava on the marocha. We already found this concept in the 7th parak of Zvachim, where there we find that a puzzle, if you make a malika on the oif, if you make a malika on a carbon that's an oif, whether it's a chat saif or an oila saif, so even though in a malika is not a ma'isa shchita, and really this bird should be an avela, but the ma'isa malika says it doesn't have tumas nevelas. It's tar from the tumas nevelas. However, that's only when you do a malika kedin. When you had a malika kedin, then there was a chidush ha'torah that this oif is not an avela. What happens if you have a malika with a sakin? If you did a puzzle malika, so then of course it's an avela. But the Mishnah says that even psulim who go ahead and are moilik, a zar will be moilik. Or you'll do malika with smell, you do malika balayla, even though these are psulim in the malika, and the malika is a pasul malika, but it's not like a malika besakin, you killed the oif, and now that the oif is dead, it's an avela. No, says the Mishnah that these psulim have a teres hechsher malika, and believe it or not, we know the halacha by malika or malika ksher is that it's mekadesh the oif. These psulim have the yechelis, have the ability to create the kedusha in the oif, at least the gabi which halachas, the gabi the halachas var perik, the gabi the halachas that if it'll go up on the rosh mizbech, it'll have akrava, and because the malika has the koyach and the ability, this malika of even a person who's pasul, or even under pasul circumstances of Smol and Lila, has the ability to be mekadesh the oif, to give a dinim of olul yerdu of mizbech mekadesh, that he should have akrava if it will go up on the rosh mizbech, that's considered a ma'isa malika, that therefore it's not an avela. And that's why the Mishnah concludes with the klal that we saw in today's daf. Today's daf on daf Pei Dalet and Aleph said there's a klal kol shepsuloi ba'kodesh, and that's a separate discussion how we define psul ba'kodesh. But kol shepsuloi ba'kodesh, if these psulim are psulim of kedusha, then the halacha is that they're olul yerdu. They created the hakrava of psulim, and since they created the hakrava of psulim, so their malika has a potential of malika, and therefore it's not an avela. The oif is not an avela. So that's one place where the fact that the Torah gave hakrava to psulim plays a role, even not only with when it went up on the mizbeach, even before that, even before going up on the mizbeach, but l'maisa, the fact that you made a malika. The malika's pasul has some relevance, has some yechelis, has some potential to create kedusha in the oif, and therefore the oif is not an avela. Another place, there's three places we're going to speak out, where this halacha because the carbon has hakrava, even though it's pasul, it gives it relevance to the gabi the chiyuv chutz. The Mishnah Daf Kuf Tesam and Aleph also tells us. If you makter b'chutz, you're chayiv for being makter or carbon b'chutz. Now, one would think if you're makter or carbon pasul, which doesn't have any place in the mikdash, so then you shouldn't be chayiv b'chutz. The general principle of chiyuv chutz is you're chayiv b'chutz because al pesach hayom ha'eleviyah, because you didn't bring the carbon within. That's why you have a chiyuv chutz. But here the Mishnah Daf Kuf Tesam and Aleph tells us that any carbon which has that potential, that if it will go on to the rosh mizbeach, it will have the akravas psulim. This carbon has dinei akrav in it. It has dinei akrav in it. And since this carbon has dinei akrav in it, so therefore it's nachshav a bar akrava. And if you're makter b'chutz, you're chai for its haktar. So again, this is the fact that the Torah created a parsha of haktar, even on psulim, created a chiyuv that even though before you put it on the mizbech, and we're going to see it doesn't have a din to make this haktara, but still, this article has within it haktara, and therefore you could be chai b'chutz. The third place where we find that this plays a role is in Meseches Meila, when we'll get up to it. And Daf Beis and Aleph, the Daf Beis and Beis, the Gemara tells us, kachim have Meila from the minute you're makdish them. A carbon that's kachim has Meila from the minute you're makdish it. If the carbon dies before the akrava, kachim shemesu, because it's not anymore oimed limitzvasai, because it doesn't have any more dinei akrava, the halacha is midaraisa, there's no Meila. Midaraisa, there's no Meila. Kachim shemesu, amar ula, amar b'yechem, kachim shemesu, yotzu midei Meila dvar Torah. However, the Mishnah Daf Beis and Aleph Meila tells us that if you made a pasul shchita, but a shchita that al kopanim would have the potential that if it goes on the rosh mizbeach, it'll have aktaras psulim, so then this carbon still has some dinim to it, still has some haktara to it, still has some akrava to it, and therefore since it still has mitzvahs in it, therefore the kedusha is still here in al-hamila. So we have had three places where the Gemara links together the concept of our parak, that psulim have akrava, and that it makes enough kamina to us the fact that psulim still have their din akrava. Now let's go back to the Rishiva's Vard from the Brisker Rav that sets up, there's two separate, you say this, two separate dinim. First is the din of mizbeach mekadesh. The din of mizbeach mekadesh is that when it goes up onto rosh mizbeach, im olu, if it goes onto the rosh mizbeach, lo yerdu, not going to bring it down. You can't bring it down. We're going to see in a minute. And im yardu, once it goes down, then lo yalu. Then it can't go back up. In other words, the halacha of kiddush mizbeach is kol zman is b'rosh mizbeach. Just as an aside, the Bris Grov had a shiloh whether the pshat is because the kedusha is like electricity that's only there kol zman is b'rosh mizbeach. Or even if it's niskadish, like normally we understand, dam goes into mizrach, it's niskadish. Goes out of the mizrach, it still has its kedusha. But even though it got its kedusha, but the whole halacha of the kedusha is only kol zman is b'rosh mizbeach. Kol zman is b'rosh mizbeach. This kedusha mizbeach is giving a dinim. What are these dinim? So the Taisus and Psachim tells us that a dover apostle has an isser to be ma'ila al gaba mizbeach. Taisus doesn't explain his source other than you see it in the Lashon of Mishnah, im alu, la yerdu, im alu means b'di'evid. So Taisus is medayik from the Mishnah that there's an isser to be ma'ila p'sul ma'gam mizbeach. That means before the dover apostle.
Not called dover.
Huh?
Isn't that from the drush of called dover?
Called dover being what baimun? That's
is anything that's
bad. There's is not covered the shchit. The question is what the issue of ma'ila al gavim mizbeach is. It's a source of much debate. I'm saying the Mikdash David has his opinion. Rabbi Zalman wants to, also says on his Hagoyis Mikdash David that it has to do with the issue of hakrovas ba'al mumen, just like there's the issue to be makriv ba'al mumen al gavim mizbeach. Halchanami, there's the issue to be makriv dover apostle al gavim mizbeach. It's a source of much debate. You see from the Lashon of Taisus that it wasn't a clear thing because Taisus just says it mikach the diuk in the Mishnah. It doesn't bring a specific source for it. But that is a true. But the fact says Taisus is that kol zman is this dover apostle is oimed al ritzpah, is not on the mizbeach. It has an issue to be makriv al gabei mizbeach. It has an issue to be makriv mizbeach. And what is the din? Kol zman is it's also to be ma'ila al gabei mizbeach. The din is we have what's called streifas psulim. That kachim psulim have a din streifa on them. But now the minute that it goes onto the mizbeach, and the mizbeach is mekadesh it, the whole game changes. Now, once it got onto the rosh mizbeach, albeit that it went on shaloikadin, because you weren't supposed to do that. However, it got on. But now that it's rosh mizbeach, the mizbeach is mekadesh it le'asis lachmei, to go ahead and make a ma'isa krav on it. That's the first halacha of the kedushas mizbeach. That the mizbeach says before you were ma'ila al gabei mizbeach, you were usher to be makter it, which possibly could be the reason why if it's yorad mi'al mizbeach, you can't be ma'ila again because you have vaiter the same isser of going ahead and putting it on the mizbeach. But once it's on the mizbeach is mekadesh to give it the ability and the mitzvah of akrava. A mitzvah of akrava, that's the le'asas lachmei. The kitchen mizbeach now says now you have a mitzvah to be makter it. Le'asas lachmei to put it in the marocha al gabei mizbeach. That's the kubra one. So that's what Rashi is. Kidshay mizbeach. Mizbeach is mekadesh le'asas lachmei, and the diuk that Rishon made is le'asas is an interesting lashon. Not lasas, le'asas, to become. Because we're going to lead, one din is going to lead into the other din. The din of the Kiddush Mizbech, which tells you to go make the Ma'aseh Akrava, is going to lead into the next parsha, which we're going to discuss, of Lachem Rosh Mizbech. So Nukuda number one of Kedushas Mizbech is that it's now giving you a mitzvah, let's say by the Ivarim, to make a Ma'aseh Haktar on them. Nukuda number two, Rashi says, Ve'em I read in Isai. The Rambam in Perek Gimel Psulim Mikdashim tells us, and the Rambam is talking about even a davar kosher. V'chein zvachim shchutim she'alu legabei mizbeach, mavshidu mitnatech b'mkaimim. Once the carbon was shechted and it went on the rosh mizbeach, you do have shenituach over there, and then umimneima lo yorid akol. The Gemara says it's not nice to mizbeach to make the mizbeach a beis hamitpachayim, to make the mizbeach the place where you to divvy out the portions of the karbonis, to make it the slaughterhouse, whatever you want to call it. But so the Rambam explains this. Why am I not bringing it down from the rosh mizbeach and doing the quote unquote dirty work down below? Says the Rambam shekol roy leishim im ol rosh mizbech lo yeri. Once it went, anything that's roy for Aktorah that goes onto the rosh mizbech, there's a lot of lo yeri. Shenamar kol negea b'mizbech yikdash. This pasuk in Parashat Tetzaveh. So the Rambam is telling us that in this pasuk in Parashat Tetzaveh is a second factor. One is the factor that you have a din to make akrav on it, and the other is the factor that you're not allowed to take it down off the mizbeach. Right now the din has changed from it being an issur to put it on the mizbeach. Now you have an issur to take it off the mizbeach. Now the Shiur pointed out that there's machlokes Rashi and the Rambam, that the Rambam brings this down even by ksherim, that even a davar kosher, once it goes on the rosh mizbeach, has an issur to take it down. Masha'inkin Rashi shita is that the only time there's an issur to take it down, and when you learn the Sugya on Pehei, you'll notice this. The Rashi shita is the only time there's an issur to take it down is only if it's possible. And the explanation that the Rishiva gave, why is a davar pasul worse off than a davar kosher? The way he explained it, and you'll see it's very mashma like that in Rashi and that Pehei, is because Rashi is learning that the yesod of the issur is being mevatel from its din. It's taking away a halacha that it could have. So on a davar kosher, by taking it down, I'm still going to have aktar on it. Go put it back up, I have no problems. The davar pasul, since if I take it down now, I'm not allowed to go return it. So by taking it down, I've been mevatel, it's mitzvah haktara. And therefore, dafka on the davar pasul, there's going to be an issur to take it down, because on the davar pasul, you're going to be mevatel it. I just, as an aside, if the Olam would like to hear my own little addition to the Rishiva's Vard, but I thought it was very meduyik in our Rashi. Our Rashi says, Kidshay mizbeach le'oses lachmoi ve'meridnesei. So what's Rashi? If you think about it, the scenario, you brought the Ivarim out to the rosh mizbeach, Kidshay mizbeach. If you'd ask me, I would say, first thing is, don't bring it down. Next thing is, go make Akhtara. That would be the order I would pick. I would say, Kidshay mizbeach, Erstens, the first thing to tell you is, don't bring it down. Next thing I'll tell you is what to do further with it, to go be makter it. Rashi says in the opposite order. First he tells you what to do with it, and then he tells you don't bring it down. But I think like the way the Rishiva explained it, it's very understood. Rashi is saying that the main point, focal point is, according to Rashi is, I have a chiyuv now to make aktara. And that creates the issur to take it down, because I'm going to be mevatel, it's the aktara. So the Rishiva explained from the Briskerov, a machlokes Rashi and the Rambam, if the kiddush mizbeach in itself is a siba not to bring it down, and therefore even by ksherim that's true, or it's only by psulim because you're going to be mevatel their mitzvahs haktorah.
Rashi says afilu davar pasul.
Oh, very good. So very good. Excellent. Excellent. The way the Rishiva is saying, it's very good. It's moving very stark. This is the answer. Everyone asks this as a stira. They ask a stira. The Rishiva says, Rashi in the beginning says afilu davar pasul. It's mashma even a davar kosher, avada davar kosher. And Rashi in the Pe'im and Aleph says that the only issur is on psulim, not on ksherim. But according to the cheshbon of the Rishiva, it comes out very good. Avada the kedushas mizbech is chal on a davar kosher too. A davar kosher is like gara from a davar pasul. Why is it migra gara? Why is it worse off? So the davar kosher also gets the kedushas mizbech. Ha mizbech mekadosh afilu davar pasul. But the issur hayrada, the issur to take it down, is only going to be applicable to the davar pasul because of the fact that only davar pasul you're going to be mevatel from its din by taking it down. Very good, mamish excellent. They want to get too deep in the Rashi, but that's that. The Rishiva asked this as a kasha. It's a steer in Rashi, Pegim without, Peyam without, and I understood that the way he was explaining for the Briskerov, it will come out. You could be miyashiv the stira by saying that the kiddush is chal and everything, but the issur hayrada is only going to be the issur to take it down is only going to be on the davar pasul because only the davar pasul can be mevatel from its din. So now we've accomplished understanding what the first din of the Briskerov is. HaMizbeach Mekadesh. What does it mean, HaMizbeach Mekadesh? We came out two things. It means, one is that you now are going to have a mitzvah to go ahead and make this Maisa Krova. Number two is that you're not going to allow to take it off. But now let's go to the second. This is the second part, and which is a very important part. The Inyan of Lach Mishal Mizbeach. What does this mean, Lach Mishal Mizbeach? So the way the Briskerov explained it is that we have the regular mitzvahs hakrava of the carbon, mitzvahs oila. We have a mitzvah hakrava that the carbon oila is mechayiv a mitzvahs hakrava. Now, pashtus, that mitzvahs hakrava is only on the davar kosher, where I'm going to have the ritzi of the carbon, then I have the mitzvah. On a davar pasul, so Rashi and Daf Pei Beis and Aleph pointed out, and I always look at like the last Rashi in the Mishnah on Daf Pei Beis and Aleph is a hakdama to the Pei Gimel and Aleph, because Rashi points out by Ein Sitz Meratzal Al Yotzei that v'af al gav. I know where Rashi comes into Daf Pei Beis, but it comes very good for Daf Pei Gimel and Aleph. V'af al gav de psum she'olu yerdu. Even though I'm telling you that psulim are olu yerdu, but you should know artzi lo martzi. Avada v'avada, you're not going to get a ritzi of your carbon with that. Your ritzi of the carbon is done. The psul accomplished that the carbon doesn't have ritzi in.
Rashi is explaining what the Mishnah's point is. Why
Mishnah's-
does the Mishnah bring tzitzin?
Right.
To tell you that, despite of what we just said,
That by Tomei-
of Zal Shmeinin, that it's tzitzin Ratzah.
Right. The tzitz matzah.
Rashi is filling that.
Yeah, enechanami. I'm asking to you. I'm just saying the point of the matter is that the ikar nekuda of Rashi is the einam ratzal yitzah that tzitz doesn't work by yitzah. What comes out of that, the fact that now the yitzah is a davar pasul, then b'ma'ayin and perak mizbech mekadosh. What happens by a davar pasul? Rashi really is doing the work of mizbech mekadosh. I hold this as a mizbech mekadosh tika Rashi. You have to know nowhere in Rashi mizbech mekadosh does Rashi say this point, which is a very important point to knowing mizbech mekadosh, that mizbech mekadosh doesn't give you ritza. That's all my point was. But yeah, you're right. The first nekuda we have to understand is that there is no more ritza carbon. There is no more ritza carbon. So what is there? Said the Briskerov that there's a new type of akrava on the cheftza, on the ivarim, on the articles of the carbon. There's a new type of akrava that it's not machmas the carbon itself and the ritza of the carbon. Each individual part of the carbon has dine akrava for themselves when they're, let's call it in the secondary situation of having been pasul. Even though by mikayach the psul the carbon is over, you're not going to have any more ritza in your carbon, but there's still each and every part of the carbon could come to hakrova if it's put in certain circumstances, meaning it has a mizbeach mekadosh to it, that it can still have hakrova, and the yisod of this hakrova is lachmish mizbeach, that this aver now became, we'll call property of the mizbeach, that you should make a hakrova for the kiyum hakrova on this aver alone. The chiyuv of the hakrova is machmas the aver, that the aver needs hakrova now. And yes, this hakrava is enough to say, okay, but the aver still has dinim, and it has meila. The aver still has dinim, and memeli yerchai b'chutz. But then it's a new type of hakrava. It's not the hakrava machmas, the carbon that comes as a result of the carbon and being mechayve. It's hakrava that comes as a result that the actual parts of the carbon, the Torah said they still have dinei hakrava if they went on the rosh mizbeach. Now the first thing that we learn out from here is the actual literal taich of the pasuk. The little translation of the pasuk is Hi ha'oila al maikta, which the Gemara later tells us, even if you have a situation where there was no kiddush mizbeach beforehand, there's certain psulim which are yerdu, which don't have the kiddush mizbeach, but still no, the Gemara in Pei Beis tells us that if they went into the marocha on the mizbeach and al maikta, they were al maikta, then the mizbeach snagged them. That they become lachmish mizbech, that they should have further in hakrava. You should further make hakrava on them. And that's like the Brisker was saying, it could be a separate standalone parsha. It doesn't not necessarily totally in kiddush mizbech. You can have this parsha of lachmish mizbech that's saying to psulim, you have hakrava still. And you have a chayvus hakrava now. Because you became lachmish mizbech. So the first part of the pasuk is the actual din by haktara. That by haktara, if you have a vorim, even if they're psulim, and they went on the marocha, now they're going to have a din to have continuous hakrava on the mizbeach. But the emes is, if we can be medayik from the Mishnah, that there's a lot more to lachmish mizbeach than haktara by a dover pasul. There's a lot more to it than that. First of all, the Mishnah discusses other things that get the dinim of hakrava. Dam, nisachim. They're not going on the fire. The dam and the sachim, you can see later in the sugam peizayin and beis pei chesam and aleph, that the din of the dam, if dam pasuk goes al rosh mizbeach, you have a chiyuv to make a zrika in the tzura of the zrika of the carbon. If the zrika of the carbon was hazah, you have to make hazah with it. If it was a shvicha, you make a shvicha. The chayvas hakrova on this dam pasul is a chayva to make the same type of hakrova they had till now. To be yaitz in the carbon, you have a chiyuv to make that hakrova weiter. To make that same type of akrava. You have a chiyuv to make that same type of akrav on the dam, and you're going to see the whole sugya, Peizayin and Beis, how you work that out. But
does it make the rest of the dam shirayim?
Oh, very good. Good.
If
you allow.
It's a big issue because the mice, if it's not still abundant with the first half of the carbon, so why would it make it shirayim?
So if you allow me, we'll get to it in 2 minutes. It's on the list. It's on the list. So exactly like he said, we have the Indian, and I appreciate it. That we have the Indian that dam has a din zrika to it. The dam puzzle gets a din zrika, and the din zrika is the same din zrika as the carbon. But as he pointed out, and this is a major piece in Chidusha Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi and Yeshiva Tzal David's grandfather Sefer Reb Chaim, that this halacha of making a zrika has many different levels. Say that I once gave a chabur, I believe I reckoned down, we're not going to do this over here, that's for a separate time, 5 different levels of zrika. There's 5 different levels of zrika. The first level of the zrika that we're going to discuss is, like you mentioned, there's a Mishnah on Daf Lamed Beis and Aleph, and I remember you pointed out this question to my father. The Mishnah tells us that if a apostle makes a Maisa Zrika, it's Nechshav a Maisa Zrika, and therefore the dam that's left over in the kais you can't use anymore. The Mishnah is medayik that when psulim make a Zrika, what's the halacha? If there's more dam in the tzaver, Yachzar Kosher Kabel. Go back and get more dam from the tzaver. So Moshe asked the question, that what's with the dam in the kais? Well, we have more dam left over in the kais. So here Reb Chaim is masber that because mizbech, because lachmish mizbech was mechalish to us, a new type of hakrova called zrika. Not only is it a zrika legabe the actual dam that you were zerik, but since the dam in the kais always in a kosher scenario has a din of shirayim from a zrika, this dam in the kais also gets a shem shirayim. Just there's shirayim psulim. There's shirayim of apostle zrika. Shirayim of apostle zrika become nidche from akrova. They don't have a din akrova. Exactly what you said that psul is, that's for another discussion. But al kapanim, that's what Reb Chaim says, that there's zrika in the dam to create that the dam shebekais is shirayim. But there's another level. There's another level. And this is an even bigger chiddush that we're going to see. It's actually in today's daf on daf Pedal and Aleph. In the Mishnah Pedal and Aleph brings the machlekes Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon. If the 3 psulim according to Reb Yehuda are olu yerdu, yotza dama, nishchata balayla, and nishpach dama. Nishpach dama that we're discussing over here explains Reb Chaim, and it's before in the sugya and daf chav zayin of Beis like this. Doesn't mean the psul of nishpach adam. It doesn't necessarily mean the psul of nishpach adam when you lost the dam before kabbalah. It's talking about the fact that you don't have dam in your carbon, and the middle the Evarim never got their zrika. Nishpach Adam means you lost the dam even after the Kabbalah. But you lost the dam, and now my Evarim don't have a zrika. Now, we know the halacha is that in order for Evarim to have the din of Aktar Adam Mizbech, they need the heter of the zrika. The zrika is mount to them to make the Aktar. Says Rabbi Yehuda, if you have Evarim of a carbon that didn't have a zrika, then those Evarim are yerdu. Those Evarim will not get the akrovas psulim of lachmish mizbech. However, you see in the Mishnah by the Mashal kibu psulim, which according to Yehuda is referring to atame. He says that it's all lo yerdu, that these Evarim go on the mizbech. The question is, by kibu psulim v'zorku es adam, why did the Evarim are without a zrika? Very nice. The psulim went ahead and their dam made a Maisa Zrika, and it had a din of Zrika, klape the fact that Lachmish Mizbech creates a din Zrika on psulim. But why the Evarim Amolo Yerdu? They should have the same halacha as Nishpach Adam. Explains Reb Chaim in Sefer that you have to understand in the Mishnah that Zrika's puzzle had the koyach and the yechilas to create that the carbon had a Zrika. This carbon is not left without a Zrika. It's a second level Zrika. It's a second level zrika. There's a level of zrika that it's with regards to the dam itself and the dam that's left over in the kais. That level of zrika says that the dam that's left over in the kais is shirayim. There's another higher level of zrika that it's even though the mechayiv of the zrika, what caused me to make this zrika was the din of lachmish mizbech, which is mikayach. We said the article, the chefs of the carbon, but not the actual carbon. But at the end of the day, says Reb Chaim a chiddush, That's why he learns the whole parak over here, that it will have the achelis to create that there was a zrika in carbon, and since there was a zrika in carbon, then this carbon is not the same as the carbon that never had a zrika. It's different. So you'll ask me, so what defines the difference between these two levels of zrika? You have one zrika psula, another zrika psula. Why is it that some zrika psulas we say that the halacha is it's a zrika for the dam, that the dam shebekais becomes shiram of a zrika psula, and some zrikas we're saying have the acheles to create that the carbon had a zrika. And the answer to that is a very important concept that I'm not sure if it's so move on when you learn the Gemara Kipshutai, but the Havana behind the Gemara, we had the Gemara really, it's the Gemara on Daf Pedalim and Beis, the end of today's Amud, but it also was brought on Daf Nun Aleph and Man Aleph. The Gemara over there says that according to Yehuda, why is it that you discriminate between psulim? Certain psulim you're telling me I'm all lo yerdu, and certain psulim are telling me I'm all yerdu. So the Gemara makes some seemingly interesting yalfusas. So the Gemara Daf Nun Aleph seems in the beginning to understand that it's just a mamatzino. Where it says, this place we find that it has minei ma'amru lon bedam kosher, sharei lon kosher be'imurim, and lon be'imurim kosher, sharei lon kosher b'basar. Lon bedam is kosher when you left the dam after shkia. It's kosher. Why? Because then if emurim, that even according to Yehuda, if emurim go on the rosh mizbach, they're possible they still have dinah krova. And the lon be'imurim, why? Because basar has a zman of 2 days and a night. And etc. The Gemara says yoytze. Why is yoytze? Because yoytze is kosher b'bama. Yoytze is kosher b'bama. And a lot of interesting different yalfusas, which the Gemara ends up saying that even though mitzad hilchas yalfusa would seem that ain't learned the davar shebech shem davar shlebech sheret, but zayis teres ha'oil riba. And really, what the Gemara is zeroing in on is our parak. Zayis teres ha'oil riba is the Mishnah in the beginning of Mezech Kash that tells us that Torah achas l'chol oilin that dvarim psulim have akrava. Now the question is, we have 3 miutim that says that there are 3 terrible psulim, worse off psulim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that these things he's memayit from getting the akrava yerdu because they're worse psulim. So the Gemara says we have to differentiate. How do we differentiate? So I want to teach you what I call my theory on Mizbech Makadosh. You have the Pythagorean theorem. I call this my theory on Mizbech Makadosh. And I'm going to teach you. I call it inverse proportion. The Gemara is explaining to us like this: we have to define which psulim are stronger and which psulim are weaker, which psulim are more chamer, and which psulim are less chamer. Says the Gemara. You know how we define that? If we find that they have hechsher b'makom acher. If the Torah was machshir this psul in a makom acher, that's a simon to us that the Torah held it's not such a terrible psul, because the Torah said it has hechsher. The strongest hechsher makom acher that's mavur and shas is that tuma hotra b'tzibur. That tome was mutter b'tzibur. We took the regular din that's also be makro b'tuma. The Torah told you b'tzibur you have to be makro v'chachila. That's the strongest level of hechsher makom acher, and therefore, since there's a strong level of hechsher makom acher, it shows us that the psul is a weak psul. So I call it an inverse proportion. Inversely proportionate to the hechsher makom acher, to the strength of the hechsher makom acher, is the weakness of the psul. The stronger the hechsher makom acher, the weaker the psul is. And inversely proportionate to the weakness of the psul is the strength of the avodah. You have a weaker psul, it's a stronger avodah. You have a stronger psul, it's a weaker avodah. So you have to go through 2 equations. First, you have to decide the psul. Is it a chamerdik psul? Is it a strong psul or a weak psul? A kaldik psul. How do I define that? I look at the hechsher makom acher. The Gemara explains to us what's a weak hechsher makom acher. The fact that yoytze is kosher b'bama. What does that mean? That when they were makriv in the bamas, every person in his backyard, there was no boundaries. Just because his backyard ended didn't mean that was a boundary for the carbon. There was no boundaries given to yoytze and mabama. So the Gemara says that's back shera. That's not a place where the Torah was machshir the psul. That the Torah said this psul is kosher, like by tumah, where it's aser and the Torah said tumah tribitzibur. That's just the Torah didn't create the psul by bama. Oh, so that's considered weak hechsher makom acher. And in fact, that's why Rabbi Yehuda says only yoytze I'm only going to be used for evarim, not for dam. Dam Tesis explains needs a stronger Hechsher Makom Acher than Ivarim. And that's the reason why Rabbi Yehuda is Mechalik Tzvisha Dam Ivarim. But the Yisod that we have to understand is, and this is the answer to your question, that Reb Chaim is telling us there's two levels of Zrika. There's a level of Zrika that only affects the Dam itself. There's a level of Zrika that affects the carbon, that says that the carbon wasn't an Ishbach, and that's going to be defined based on the strength of the Psul. If it's a stronger Psul, it's a weaker Avodah. If it's a weak Psul, it's a stronger Avodah. And what defines the strength of the Psul? It's Hechsher Makom Acher. If it's a strong place where we find the Torah took that Psul, said, no, but you're kosher in a certain place, then we understood that the Torah is saying it's a Shvacher Psul. And since it's a Shvacher Psul, the Avodah is strong. That's why, according to all Deis Atome, when you Tomei does the Zrika, it creates that the Dam Shebitzaver is also Nimche. Now, we're singing Daf Lamed Aleph Beis. The reason why the Gemara Meila tells us that Tomei, it's not in Lamed Aleph Beis, it's in Meila Daf Ham Beis. The Gemara tells us that by Tomei, if he makes a Zrika, that Zrika is Chal. You know what? Even so strong that it creates that the Dam Shebitzaver is Dochi. Why? Because the Tomei's Hechsher Makom Acher is so strong that it weakens his psul to the extent that we're machshir the zrika so strong that it creates the dam shebitzaras doch. So what do we come out from here? We just move forward to zrikas and we saw that there's different levels of zrika, that there's zrika of psul. But I want to point out one more thing, and that is that it doesn't only it's not only relevant to zrika and to haktara, which is happening based on a kiddush mizbech. If everyone thinks about what we discussed with the malik of a puzzle, or the shchita of psulim, we have in our Mishnah, shchitas laila. Shchitas laila. You did a shchita by laila. The halach is that the shchita is a shchita psulim. So how is it that this carbon is different than a carbon that you chopped off its head? Why is it different than a kachim shemesu? Why is shchitas laila any different than kachim shemesu? So the Rishonim and Taisus and the Shita Megletzes explain because the laila has hechsher makom acher. And therefore what? The same principle. Because it has Hechsher Makom Acher, it's a Shvacher Psul. Since it's a Shvacher Psul, it's a weaker Psul, it's a stronger Avodah. And this Shchitas Laila is Mekadesh to carbon. This carbon is not dead. This carbon had a Kedusha of the Shchita. Now, albeit it's not a Kedusha to give it regular Dina Akrova. It's only going to give it the Akrova of our Perek. But it's giving it that Akrova. It's giving that is the halach of Shchitas Psulim. So that's one place we see it. Or like we said by Malika, a Malika of Apostle. Also, it's not like a Malika Sakin. It was a Malika, and it created the halachas of Ol Yerdu. And that's without Kiddush Mizbeach. That's just the fact that the Torah created this parsha of what I call the general parsha of Lachmish Mizbeach, that introduced a Yisai, that a carbon can have Dina Akrova even b'psul, that taught us that even by Shchita, Malika, what about Kibbutz Psulim? Did anyone ever think about it? Why is Kibbutz Psulim not a Nishpach? Why is when a Apostle Mekabel the Dam, why is it any different than Nishpach Adam from the Kli? I'm a Zar, Chas V'Sholom, I would be Mekabel the Dam and be over alive. We want to do that. But let's say I'm a Zar and I would be Mekabel the Dam. I would think, at first glance, that Dam is no worse than if it fell on the floor. And it was Nishpach Min HaKli Al Ritzvah. Yet the Mishnah says that there's Chilukim.
Why would you think that that's the same?
Because what am I doing that's creating some?
You don't have Kabbalah's Kasha, you don't have Ba'avid.
What?
You don't have Ba'avid.
Right, so I would think that I'm like a Nishpach, right?
It's exactly like Nishpach Mitzavar Behim Al Ritzvah.
That's what it should be. But yet in our Mishnah we see by Kibbutz Psulim Azarkos Dam was Lo Yerdu. And Nishpach Adam Yudol is the Yerdu. What happened?
Why was that Zrika better?
Why is that Kabbalah? Yeah, why is that Zrika better?
You want to know what the because of the Zar's Kash for Shchita?
Because the Torah says that the Zar's Kabbalah is a Kabbalah. It has to be that the Zar's Kabbalah, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly the point. A Zar's Kabbalah has to be Nechshav a Kabbalah, at least at a certain level, to create Mizbeach Mekadesh Tikadinim, because if not, then his Kabbalah should be like a Nishpach. And we find Chilukim.
You're learning that once the Gemara says, Yehuda's Samech, Kasamech,
Right.
the Gemara fell off. What the Gemara said, Kibbutz Psulim is the Psulim that are Akasha b'Makamacha?
No.
And it goes on all Psulim? Or it's
No, only on Tomei, because again, that Rebuta is only Marbe.
So what's your Kasha?
What?
So what's your Kasha?
What? By according to
Tomei, the answer
by-
is Tomei, because it's Chazi b'Makamacha.
Oh, and what? The Hechshem Makamach. Okay, right. Let's say Kibbutz Tomei. Very good. Kibbutz Tomei. Kibbutz Tomei will be considered a Kabbalah, and it's better than Nishpach. Why? There's no mizbeach mekadosh necessarily. Okay, by Kabbalah maybe klisharis.
Bring a raya
That I'm bringing a raya that Elamai that avodas Kabbalah b'psul is still an avodas Kabbalah. It's an avodas Kabbalah to what does it create? It created the dinim of Olah Yerdu in the carbon.
You're saying Zor by Bama is no different than Yaitza by Bama.
What?
Because it's not trying.
Yes, Zor. That's why Zor has a weak hashemah gemach. The Gemara says that.
I understand.
Yeah, correct. That's why Rebuda's Mamayit Zor and he's Marba Tomid. That's the reason. Because Zor is a weak hashemah gemacher, so he holds that it's Nismayit. Mashenkin. There's a rise even according to Reb Shimon. That Reb Shimon divides it into two cases, Nishbach and Kibbutz Psulim. According to Reb Shimon, it's all Psulim. Same concept. That according to that, we find that Psulim are considered Akrava. And this Akrava, that's what I'm saying, this Akrava goes through all the avodas of the carbon. That they could have a din Akrava, at least vis-a-vis the din of Lachmas Mizbeach, that it should have a din Akrava. Just to sum up, though, a little bit, we said that Rashi in Daf Pei Beis says that they don't have Ritzi. That means that once it's double apostle, the carbon is not going to have Ritzi. You're not Yotzi your carbon, please bring another one. Legabe Achilas Basar, there's a Rashash in Baba Kama, Daf Ayin Vav, that says Avada such as Rika will not be mat to the bas of Achila. You cannot eat the bas of this carbon. Legabe, whether could you be makter lechatchila devarim? Let's say you had a situation where the dam is pasul, devarim pasul, and you made a zrika with this dam pasul, but that had a din of mizbeach mekadosh. Could I go be makter the evarim lechatchila, where did the zrika pasul have the achilas to create hatar aktar simurim? We'll find later on daf where is it? Peivav Manalf Amabeis. That's a machlekes Rashi with Taisus in that. I'm sorry, Peizayin. It's a machlekes Rashi with Taisus. The Rashi learns actually that this Rika, because it was the kitchen mizbeach, has the yichus to be matzah the emurim laktara. And Pashas Taisus is a chaylik in that. I mean, Rav Yishem are chaylik against the chiddush of Rashi. So for most circumstances, enochinami, it's not creating hachshar carbon, but it is creating that the hakrova that you did is hakrova.
The Rav is not going like that, Rashi.
Why?
Because the Rav is saying that it gets separated, and we no longer see the Zrika of the behemoth. It's a
Oh, okay. There's a way to explain it. There's a way to explain that the Rav meant what the start of the chiyuv is and what the end of the chiyuv is. The start of the chiyuv is not mikach the carbon. It could be that it ends up working evenly with the carbon. That would be the answer to that, but it's a good question that you raised. How, according to Briskov, how does that work according to Rashi? But and again, Rashi is also considered a chiddush in this halacha. So just to sum up what I hope, Mitzvah Hashem, we accomplished in this shiur, is that we have the concept of Kiddush Mizbeach, which does two things for us. That gives us the heter to make our krov on it, le'as slachmai, and tells us that we have an issur to be murdered. Then we have the concept of Lachmei Mizbeach, that the start, like we said, of the hakrova is the article of the Mizbeach, the chefs of the carbon, not the actual carbon. The carbon is puzzle, it's done. We spoke about the different dargas of Zrika, that there could be different levels of Zrika. That Reb Chaim explains to us that even within Hakrava Sulim, there could be different levels of Zrika. We gave the Mizbech Mekadosh theorem of how we understand what the level of Zrika is. There's a concept in the Gemara Vayter of Hechsher Kamacher, that the Hechsher Kamacher says that it's a weaker, the stronger the Hechsher Kamacher is the weakness of the Psul, and the weakness of the Psul therefore affects the strength of the Avodah. We discussed the fact that even in all the Akravas of the carbon, not only the Aktar and the Zrika, which is happening with the actual Kiddush Mizbeach, but even the Shechita or the Kabbalah or the Malika, there could be a Kiddush even b'Psul. And we said that there are various nafkaminas of this Hakrova Psula, both with regards to the Malika, that it's considered a Malika, that it's not an Avela for Tumas Beis Abliya, the fact that it's considered still a Bar Hakrova, that you're Mechayev and a Bechutz, and the fact that since it still has Dina Hakrova, that it would still be Meila. We should all be Zeicha, and we should be to see the Binyan Beis Hamikdash and have the Hakrova Dafka Behechsher. We should never have to come out to Hakrova Mizbeach Kaddish. From here, Amen.